Welcome to the Lakers Central podcast. I'm your host, Alex. Make sure you're following Lakers Central on social media at Lakers Central 365 and tell all Laker fans about this podcast. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Raj of 3CB Performance. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Raj. How are you?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me again. Well, unfortunately, having me on again for injury purposes.
Can you tell everybody how they can find you?
Sure. Yeah, y'all can find me on social media, whether that's on Twitter, Instagram, or my YouTube channel. It's at 3CB, 3 Charlie Beta Performance. Perfect.
So like you said, Dr. Raj, unfortunately, I'm having you back on when there's an injury. But we got good news today. But I want to start with what happened against the Knicks. So Anthony Davis, he took what looked like a nasty fall against the Knicks when he was contesting a Julius Randle layup. I think all Lakers fans collectively held their breath because Anthony laid there for a little while holding his back. But fortunately, as of this recording, a number of national and local outlets are reporting that X-rays came back negative, MRI came back negative. I think Mike Trudell tweeted that AD had a Gluteus Maximus contusion, and he's listed for questionable against Dallas, but he will travel with the team on their 2-game road trip. So what I want to ask you is what happened, because when this all happened, I saw that you tweeted that AD had just fell, and he fell hard on his ischium, his tailbone, if I pronounced that right. And you said...
real quick, so it was actually, I misspoke. Tailbone is actually the coccyx.
Got it. You were one of the first people, maybe the only person I saw that was kind of like, he'll be okay. And then you followed that up with some of your reasoning, but just what did you see when it happened?
I mean, what I saw was he literally just fell on his low back, sacral area. And the reason why I knew it was, it's a painful thing, but when you see like a sacral fracture or anything like that, which people were wondering, it's typically from extremely high force incidents like a motor vehicle accident, MVA. You don't see it from a fall unless you're falling from like 3, 4, 5 stories. So it's pretty incredible how durable that anatomy is. You need a high level force, especially if you're just having that blunt impact like he did. Like there's no what we call like a shearing force where you're rotation. He literally just hit it blunt, like a blunt object. That takes a lot of force to break a bone in that region. And that's why you said all Laker fans. There was one, myself, who I felt like I knew it was going to be painful. It looks a lot worse than what it is. And injuries tend to do that. For example, people were slow motioning Avery Bradley's ankle sprain, right? And they're like, oh, he's going to be out for X, Y, Z. And it's hard to do that with injuries. And in this case, it was literally just a contact injury on a bony, hard surface. Painful. I'm sure he was in shock at first, right? Just the hard fall. Got the wind knocked out of him, allegedly. But then you saw, as he started to get up and move around, he was definitely sore, moving gingerly. And someone had on Twitter had a post about, they had a video of AD. I don't know if you saw this, but he was like really walking slowly, and they're like, "This is what you look like when you play a ball after 33 years old," like that very ginger walk with the stretcher behind him. And so no, but anyways, yeah, I mean, it was just one of those injuries that looks a lot worse than what it is. And a key differentiator to your point, initially they were calling it a sacral contusion, and then they had that. So an X-ray looks at bone, basically to check for fractures for the most part. This is there's other specifics, but generally MRI is looking more at soft tissue, which is things like ligaments, tendons, muscle. And so then we found out on the MRI, it's actually positive news that he's actually a glute max, which is one of your major butt muscles, for lack of a better descriptor, that he has a bruise in. So the fact that it's actually a bruise of the muscle is a much, much better diagnosis than a bruise in the bone, which can lead to swelling and also some what we call like micro fractures in the bone. And then that also involves some blood. So for example, like you have guys last year, like with Lonzo, who had a bone bruise, and they can be kind of very nagging. So the fact that it's a muscle is the reason very likely that might actually play Friday.
Hey guys, this is Ryan Schlip, host of the Packernet Podcast, and I wanted to tell you about Mack Weldon. The most comfortable underwear, socks, shirts, undershirts, hoodies, and sweatpants, and more that you'll ever wear. We're guys. We want comfort and an easy shopping experience when it comes to what we wear. Mack Weldon takes care of both. Now, I personally have gone out and gotten some Mack Weldon clothing, and since I like to be comfortable with the clothing I wear, I thought I'd pick up a shirt, some lounge pants, a nice hoodie. Not only was it comfortable, but honestly, the best way for me to explain it to you would be an experience. This is premium quality fabric that I've never really felt before. These are clothes that I'd be happy to wear out, but also love to come home and slip on when I get home from work. They've also got a line of silver underwear and shirts that naturally help eliminate odor. I'm not talking about color. This is silver infused. And because you're listening to this podcast, Mack Weldon has a great offer for you to take advantage of. Get 20% off your first order. Just visit MackWeldon.com and enter promo code OVERTIME. Again, 20% off your first order. Just enter promo code OVERTIME when you visit MackWeldon.com. And since they want you to be comfortable, if you don't like your first pair of underwear, you get to keep it and they'll still refund you, no questions asked. MackWeldon.com. Use promo code OVERTIME for 20% off your first order.
So that's what, and I was going to ask you about that, about the difference between it being the muscle versus the bone. But so how does Anthony Davis, how does he heal from this? And could it be a lingering issue for the rest of the season?
Highly doubtful. I mean, it's just imagine you get if you get hit really hard in a muscle, it's going to react. You're going to have soreness in the area. You're going to have bruising, but it's not really impacting. It's a matter of managing soreness and discomfort, really. There's no structural damage in this instance because he hit it flat, right? There was like no torquing of the muscle or anything like that. And so once that muscle gets past that soreness, he's going to be just fine.
So you wouldn't, I mean, I guess you're not surprised that he's traveling with the team, and you probably wouldn't be surprised if he actually played on Friday.
No, absolutely not. Once I heard glute max contusion, it's a bruise of the muscle. I mean, there's different layers to it, but there's a reason why he's traveling with the team because he has a chance to play. And really, it's just going to be a matter of they'll take him he'll get treatment. They'll take him through protocols. Same thing as the ankle sprain. They'll see how he responds pregame. And if he's within that normal range where he feels okay, they'll probably let him play. And, to be honest, that area doesn't really get, super stressed during a game either. It's not like it's a ligament or a tendon or something of that nature. Now, if you get hit again in that area, like LeBron did with his adductor, the groin, sure. But that's a possibility at any time, right?
Right.
So that risk is always inherent.
Got it. Now this year, AD has played through a number of minor injuries, but he's still been very dominant, and he's only missed 2 games this season. Do you think that he's playing more through some of the pain and some of the minor aches and injuries because this team has a legit title shot?
I would say, yeah, most likely. I mean, just human psychology, right? If you know you're playing for something and you're winning, you tend to keep playing through it, and you're seeing the team galvanized. Whether it's not just AD and LeBron, but you got guys like KCP and Bradley, and even Kuz tried to do it at first, but they shut him down for a little bit, playing through injury. And you also know you have a head PT in Judy O, who's quite accustomed to getting guys through injuries because Kobe was seemingly always had something going on, right? And so that's the other side of the coin, is that you have her there to be able to manage these injuries. And I think what we don't realize with injuries is that it's not like you're injured or you're not. Like, it's a spectrum. That's why with the LeBron talk about, the groin and all that, should he just sit? It's not quite that simple as, if you're injured, you just rest, right? It's there's levels to it. There's nuances to it. And so, for example, with LeBron, like is he suddenly healthy? Or was he always, because he hasn't really grabbed at the groin? No, it was never really that big of an issue. But as you've seen with individuals who aren't familiar with injuries, right? There tends to be that fixation that if someone's hurt, it's like the end of the world. Yeah, it's really not. It's really always a process in figuring out, okay, how much pain there is, how is that person responding to movement, and then you have protocols in place to intensify the stress on those areas and see how they respond.
Got it. And you led right into my final 2 questions for you. But the first was Dr. Judy O. So the Lakers, they rehired her. I'm familiar that she worked with Kobe. I by now I think a lot of Laker fans know that she worked with him in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. But anyway, they brought back Dr. Judy O, and her title was Director of Sports Performance. Everything that I've read and heard about her says that she's one of the most respected people in sports therapy. Up until this year, we had a number of injuries. You mentioned Lonzo earlier, Brandon Ingram. It seemed like we had guys injured all the time. And Lakers parted ways with Marco Nunez. They brought in I don't know if she's a doctor, but they brought in Nina Shea as their head athletic trainer. Are you aware of anything that they might be doing differently to improve the physical well-being of these players?
I'm not aware myself, but what I have seen with them is that they tend to be a little more proactive with the guys. So the most recent example was Caruso. People were wondering why he's not playing as much. And I had noticed 3 weeks ago, I believe it was 3, he was starting to get ice on that right calf. And so they were taking notice of that and then reducing his minutes. And then they decided to even just sit him out and be proactive about it rather than just, seeing where it goes. So I think I think Seto and everyone below her has a really good understanding of when enough is enough, or when that risk reward kind of balance is tilting too much toward risk, and therefore you shut it down. Like, people forget with LeBron, he did sit out a game as well, right? When he needed to. So it's not like he's just playing through everything. If he needs to, he will sit. AD did sit out a game as well. And so it's not like they haven't done it, but the rest itself isn't always the right formula. Oh, just rest, right? If that worked, no one would ever be injured if you just rested. That's just not how it works. But I think, to your point, I think that from what I've seen, they just have a better understanding of those indicators that show that this person might be inching toward that point where that injury could get worse. I would say the only mistake I've seen from them this year is allowing Kuz to play after his ankle injury. I was surprised they kept letting him play for those 5 games, because he didn't look right at all. Like, you could tell he was not himself physically. But then to their credit, they rectified that by shutting him down for the following 5, and he's looked good physically since then.
Yeah, I think Kuz, coming into the season, he got hurt over the summer with Team USA. It seemed like he missed the first 4 or 5 games, and then really struggled to kind of, I think, find his footing. And to your point, I do think that he was struggling still with that injury, and then he missed a few more games, and since then, it looks like he looks fairly healthy.
Absolutely. Same thing you see with Bradley, right? You have to find a rhythm for these guys, especially for role players who don't have the ball that much. It's hard to find a rhythm if you're constantly in and out of the lineup, and the team is finding that identity without you. Like with Cruz, early on in the season, the team really established that defensive identity, and he wasn't there for that. So then he comes back in and he's thinking, okay, how do I get myself back into this team? I don't want to really disrupt it, but I still got to find my own path as well. And I still think he's trying to figure that out. And to me, that's part of his offensive struggles, at least. Defensively, he's played pretty well, in my opinion. But offensively, you see he's still trying to find his rhythm. And a lot of that is based on how disjointed his season has been from the injuries.
That's a fair point. I wanted to ask this final question of you, and you touched on it a little bit because LeBron has missed a game this season, but I want to ask you about load management. And as you mentioned, LeBron's missed 1 game, but if you look across the hall, Kawhi's missed 10 already, and he's 7 years younger than LeBron, so they clearly have different philosophies on load management. But is load management, is it real? Is it a real form of treatment or prevention? I mean, what are we seeing, or what do you think that these teams are using this load management for?
So, I mean, Kawhi has an injury, or you could say 2 injuries, both knees, that are potentially, if you overwork them, they become degenerative. He has tendinopathy in both knees. So he actually has a real reason. And I made a video on Kawhi's load management and why he needs it, is that he has a legitimate reason for why he's doing these things. So when it comes to tendinopathy, it's on a spectrum. If you keep overloading that tendon past what it can handle, it will get to the point where it becomes degenerative. And if it gets to that, if it blows up on you during the season, it's really hard to get out in front of. For example, Josh Hart last year, he dealt with it.
Mm-hmm.
He kept playing, and that's why in early January, his play fell off a cliff, and he said it. He couldn't jump. He couldn't land appropriately. He went from like a 41% 3-point shooter to like shooting something like 23% in January.
Mm-hmm.
And then he tried to get PRP, had a procedure, missed the rest of the season. Joel Embiid as well. Last season, he sat out, I think, the first 8 games after the All-Star break with patellar tendinopathy. And even then he was being rested during the playoffs, he had to rest some games. And even now he's being proactively load managed. So in my opinion, based off what I know about Kawhi's injuries, they're handling it the right way. You have to be very, very proactive with those tendinopathy issues, especially during the season. Whereas LeBron doesn't really have that same type of injury, right? If he was, I firmly believe if LeBron had that same injury, he's very, very smart in understanding what he needs to do and not do in order to keep playing. I have no doubt LeBron would do the same thing if he had an injury that required it.
He's coming into last night's game. I think he was a little under the weather, and I just saw a number of fans saying, sit out, all this stuff. And LeBron knows his body better than us as fans do, and he's got access to some of the best doctors in the world. So I'm always going to side with him and what he decides to do with his own body. Final question. Last night you saw Bobby Portis take that swipe at KCP and kind of go at his head. He went through concussion protocol. He ended up being okay, but I mean, what did you think of that play?
I mean, I think probably what everyone else thought. What the hell are you doing, man?
Right.
Right. The thing is, why afterwards he's like, I was going for the ball. Why are you winding up your arm? Right? Go for the ball is one thing. The problem is it was just completely unnecessary. And honestly, I think the biggest thing was how quickly they threw him out. Like the refs looked at it once.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's a flagrant 2. Like it was an easy decision. Right. He wound up. I mean, it's a dangerous play. It wasn't, I never thought it would cause a concussion, but what's really dangerous there is the landing. Because KCP goes up like with no regard for his body. Sometimes you get hit in the air like that, you don't know how you're going to land. And so, of course you get hit in the head as well. He turned out he was fine. It was a reckless play, man. Like that's the type of play. If you do that on a street court,
oh yeah,
like you're getting bodied afterwards. Something's going down. So that was silly. It was really silly. A completely unnecessary play. And I think even, you correct me if I'm wrong, on the AD fall, did he get a push in the back? I don't even know what
it looked like. I thought he got nudged a little bit. I mean, and same thing with KCP. AD goes up sometimes with like this reckless abandonment where he just kind of flies. And so he ends up on the ground a lot. And I do think he may have been pushed or nudged a bit in the back. And I mean, his legs were certainly out from under him. That's why he ended up landing the way that he did. But I'm just glad that it didn't turn into something much worse.
No, likewise. Like I said, he was very, very fortunate in that regard.
Well, Dr. Raj, I appreciate you taking the time to come back on the show and explain all this medical stuff to those of us that don't have PhDs and such. Tell everybody how they can find you.
Y'all can find me on social media. My tag that means Twitter, Instagram, also on YouTube as well. To find me at 3CB Performance, 3 Charlie Beta Performance. And thanks for having me on again, man. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Raj. He's a big Laker fan and very knowledgeable, not just about the medical stuff, but on-court play as well. I just dropped a new video on YouTube called The Lakers Have a Kyle Kuzma Dilemma, so make sure you check that out. Make sure you follow me across social media at Laker Central 365. Subscribe to the podcast, and until next time, I'm out.